Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Saturday, May 29th, 2021, and today I'm going to be taking a look at a 2024 election prediction between Governor Ron DeSantis from the state of Florida and President Joe Biden. Now, I first want to say in the beginning of this video that if you do hear any background noise or voices, I apologize. I'm currently at the beach for senior week, I guess the senior beach week that you do when you graduate high school. I graduated yesterday, and now I am at Ocean City, Maryland, and unfortunately, I won't be in my room where I normally record, which means that there also are going to be some type of background noises. So I've turned down the mic sensitivity a slight bit, so my voice might sound a little bit softer or different than normal. That's just because I've altered the microphone settings, because currently I'm recording in the bedroom that is separated from the rest of them, but you still might hear a little bit of background noise, which is a little unfortunate, but that's just what we're working with today and for the next 6 days until June 5th. 6th is when I'll be officially home. So this video has been requested for quite some time now between the governor of the state of Florida, someone who is not adored, I would say that's not the right word for it in Florida, but certainly someone who is popular across the state. And then of course you have President Joe Biden, someone who is a well-known figure for obvious reasons and has a pretty strong chance, I would say, at his re-election bid as of today, as of the way that the American public approves of Joe Biden. You're talking about someone who has a plus 13 approval rating nationwide, which means if this was the actual election day, Joe Biden would likely win re-election. Now, why Ron DeSantis? Why is this something that has been circulating around my personal channel and other forms of social media and other news networks? Well, Ron DeSantis seems to be polling well. At least when Donald Trump is taken off the ballot, Ron DeSantis is either number 1 or number 2. And it's something that we've actually seen as a consistent trend following him getting second place at the CPAC straw poll, where they can pretty much just polled the conservatives, the establishment ones at that, across the United States, the ones who were in attendance at the Conservative Political Action Conference held down in Florida, which is actually normally held in my county up here in Maryland, but it was held down in Florida due to COVID-19 restrictions. It actually might stay there largely because of President Trump. But when they asked the establishment GOP and a couple of the outsiders there, just everyone who was at the convention, they asked, who would you have if you could choose today to be the 2024 Republican nominee? And while the overwhelming majority or overwhelming number of people in attendance said Donald Trump, Ron DeSantis came in second place. And then when Donald Trump's name was taken off of the ballot, Ron DeSantis got 43% of the CPAC straw poll vote. So essentially, the establishment GOP and those who were in attendance at CPAC, simply, one and the same, were okay and were actually thinking about the idea of Ron DeSantis being the 2024 Republican nominee. So that's why his name is being brought up and why I think it's really interesting and worth looking at the election results between the two candidates and what it could actually mean for the rest of the country and how this campaign will likely be very different from what we normally would expect. So Ron DeSantis is pretty much Donald Trump without the boisterous and uncalculated not claims, but I guess statements. President Trump in the 2020 election seemed to go off the record and off the books a number of times that ultimately led to his defeat. You had the American voter turn away from him in which was otherwise a beneficial election for Republicans back in 2016. And while Donald Trump was able to retain many swing states, for example, Iowa, Ohio, and Florida, and North Carolina, he lost a number of others. He lost Georgia, Arizona. He lost a number of states that he won in 2016 as well, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. And the results came at the end with Donald Trump winning 232 electoral votes to Joe Biden's 306. Now we have a new electoral map, which brings down the electoral vote count for Joe Biden down to 303 to the Republicans' 235, but it's still an electoral victory in which Joe Biden flipped 5 states and 1 congressional district, which means that looking at the 2024 map, Ron DeSantis wouldn't exactly be in too powerful of a position because Republicans aren't the incumbent party. If anything, Ron DeSantis would have to expand on the Donald Trump victories in Florida and North Carolina and counteract some of the significant shifts in other states, even beyond the 2020 election. So I'm going to go ahead and characterize all of the states that are traditional swing states as toss-ups, so that way we can actually spend a bit more time characterizing those states, and then I'll get into a few that are deemed safe right now that I'm going to move over into the likely column, just because some of those states by margin do end up in the likely column, but it doesn't necessarily mean that, DeSantis or Biden have a realistic shot at some of the states. It really just boils down to the margin of victory, which you can see in the comment section down below. The description box down below. So that brings us to 230 toss-up electoral votes, but we have a general idea of how many of these states are going to go. I think that it's very clear that Virginia is going to go to Joe Biden in this instance, that Colorado and New Mexico are likely to follow suit. And the thing about Ron DeSantis is, while he may resonate with voters better in Florida, I don't necessarily think that means it will translate to support across the rest of the country. Ron DeSantis' individual popularity amongst Hispanics in the state of Florida doesn't necessarily mean that he will be, translating that to widespread support from the Hispanic/Latino voting bloc across the nation. I mean, Ron DeSantis is in a very individual situation where he's in a state that has some pretty conservative minority voters, whereas other states might not, whereas other swing states certainly do not. If you look at the social issues of Cuban voters in Florida, which are a very key portion of the Republican voting group, there simply aren't as many in Arizona, even though Arizona may have nearly the same amount of Hispanic voters in terms of overall percentage. The voters in Arizona, however, are a little bit more liberal. They're a little bit more open-minded towards some of the things that Joe Biden was proposing in the 2020 election and consequently voted for him. And then you have Florida, which actually shifted to the right by double the margin that it was in 2016. So Ron DeSantis, I don't think he would have as good of an impact for both Democrats and against them in certain swing states. I think that Ron DeSantis, while being a candidate who certainly could try to rewrite and change the electoral map through his appeal in Florida and possibly maybe surrounding areas, I don't think he's as strong as some people might make him out to be. Ron DeSantis isn't this inspirational and awe-inspiring candidate that the Republican Party desperately would want him to be. And at the end of the day, Ron DeSantis isn't necessarily someone I could see winning the presidency, at least against Joe Biden, if the election was held today. Because Biden's popularity isn't necessarily a fluke, but I do think that as time changes, as years go on, the Democratic Party's vote share in certain states does go down, whereas the Republican Party vote share also goes down in other states. I mean, both of them happen, and you've seen this reduction in support across numerous swing states. The Rust Belt, which was once a Democratic lockdown, is now leaning towards the right relative to the majority of the country. I mean, Joe Biden won the popular vote by 5 points, yet Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania all went to Joe Biden by less. The opposite was true in 2012 and 2008, and I find it to be quite interesting. So for Joe Biden's sake, I do think that he will do well, but the support will be reduced across the Rust Belt. And while Ron DeSantis I don't think would be necessarily the best candidate for the GOP in 2024, I do think that he will have a better shot at the presidency than Donald Trump. I think that Donald Trump, while being a better performing Republican across some of the states, his chances are very limited. I mean, the reason why I say he would perform well is because we know that he would win certain swing states. For Ron DeSantis, I don't think that's applicable. I mean, Donald Trump is in a position where he probably won't win the election, but sure, could hold on to Iowa and Ohio and maybe Florida, and that would be a good showing for the former president. But that chance at victory is very small. For Ron DeSantis, he has a pretty good shot at the presidency. I wouldn't say he's the favorite to do so currently, but he has a pretty good shot at the presidency. It's just a matter of how he gets there. And even if he does do worse than Donald Trump, it doesn't necessarily mean Ron DeSantis didn't have a better shot at the presidency. Because while Donald Trump has that solid base that will be there for him time and time again, Ron DeSantis might not, but Ron DeSantis also in the right scenario could win over many, many voters. But like I had said, I think that Joe Biden, while being able to win some of the states, won't have this pretty strong coalition exactly what he had in the 2020 election. I mean, Minnesota, which was a state that went to Joe Biden by around 7 points, I can imagine being reduced to around 5. Same thing in the state of New Hampshire. The thing is, without Donald Trump, some of these states actually return back to being swing states, exactly how they were in 2016 and 2012 and 2008. And while Minnesota didn't necessarily and doesn't necessarily have a long history of being a swing state, I think the changing demographics across the Rust Belt speak for themselves. The states are getting whiter, and consequently, more Democrats are, performing worse and worse and worse because of this change in demographic, change in electorate. The Democratic Party hasn't and won't perform as well in the future as they did in previous elections, largely because of that. But for Ron DeSantis, I also think there are some areas where, he will be able to win, but not by as large of a margin as Donald Trump. And while Texas may be a state that will be contested, and Republicans will have the advantage, I think Democrats certainly will be giving the Republicans a run for their money in Texas. I mean, the fact that Donald Trump only won the state by 5.6% really is a testament in itself, largely because Texas was a solid Republican state in 2012, in 2008, in 2004, and 2000. I mean, Joe Biden is the first Democrat in a long time to come so close to winning the state. The first Democrat since, 1976 to crack a certain percentage relative to Jimmy Carter. I mean, Joe Biden did very well in Texas, but it simply was not enough. But I think that trend is largely irreversible. It's a trend that has been in place for the past 8 years and will likely to continue to go on and on and on. The fact is, as more minority voters, specifically Hispanic voters, enter into the state of Texas, the more the Democratic Party vote share increases. As the white population decreased, the Democratic Party vote share increased. I don't think that was a coincidence. And, but at the end of the day, in my prediction, I do think Ron DeSantis would win the state of Texas, but you can't deny the inevitable shift of the state that we've seen election after election after election. So Texas, while being a Ron DeSantis state, still on the worry list for the GOP. And for Ron DeSantis, I think largely because of his close association with President Trump, that he would hold on to states such as Iowa and Ohio. But I don't think that he would be able to have blowout victories the same way Donald Trump did in the 2020 election. As it stands currently, I can't really justify Joe Biden winning Iowa and Ohio, but his popularity does seem to speak for itself. And I think that Joe Biden, even though right now it seems like America is very polarized, which we are, many people still do support President Biden and still sort of rally behind him as this, I guess, maybe obligation to the incumbent president or this honeymoon period, whatever it might be. At the end of the day, Joe Biden seemingly is popular and is someone who is doing well. But for Florida, I've already characterized it as likely Republican, and I think that, specifically in Florida, that Ron DeSantis' appeal, of course, will extend. I mean, he's the governor, and he's a popular one at that. But the ability to win over Florida voters doesn't necessarily mean that it gives Ron DeSantis the ability to win over voters, even in maybe Georgia or North Carolina. And while the electoral map, unfortunate as it is, rarely ever changes, I don't think it'll be the exact same as the 2020 map, but I don't think Ron DeSantis is really going to either expand his coalition nor lose a significant number of states relative to the 2020 election performance. The margins, however, are what matters. And for Ron DeSantis, between Joe Biden and him, I think that Arizona would be a lean Democratic state. And I also think Georgia would as well. Even if Ron DeSantis could return some of these more traditional voters back to the idea of conservatism and the idea of a right-wing president, that's not something that seems to be popular in either of these two states. In addition, these two states have increasing minority populations. While it was largely a combination of that in addition with voters that were traditional Republican voters, Romney voters, Tom Price voters in that 6th district, now they are turning into more moderate Democratic voters. And Joe Biden will largely win them over, again, because of the damage President Trump and partially Ron DeSantis did to the GOP. In addition, these two states are increasing in terms of population, increasing in terms of minority vote share. That, I think, will definitely help Joe Biden or the Democrats in 2024 with their re-election chances, even on the statewide level, the local level, and of course, like we're talking about, the national level. Now, for Joe Biden in the state of Nevada, I'm not seeing a significant improvement or a significant reduction. I think it'll stay around the same where it has in the past, and I'm not really surprised to see Nevada as a blue state yet again, especially with Ron DeSantis. Now, for the 2nd district in the state of Nebraska, I am going to say that I think Joe Biden will narrowly win it. I don't think it'll be a 7-point margin of victory, largely because President Trump was that one president who is pushing away those voters by a pretty significant amount. In the 2nd district in Maine, I think that Ron DeSantis will win it by a lean margin. That means 1 to 5%. I'm not really expecting a large margin of victory the same way it was for Donald Trump. But again, things can change. But as of right now, I wouldn't be too confident in that victory. It's definitely going to be a congressional district that's going to be fought for and won't necessarily be ignored by either two political parties, because one electoral vote can make or break an election in the event of a tie, which I think is quite interesting. And I'm sure that the parties are going to want to invest their resources in every single electoral vote possible. So now we're down to the standard Rust Belt plus North Carolina. I think the Rust Belt is more interesting to see over time. And while Ron DeSantis, I wouldn't necessarily say is someone who could appeal to voters in the Rust Belt by a very large amount, I'm also not going to really buy the fact that I think that Ron DeSantis would not be able to do as well as Donald Trump because of the changing demographics. And I do think that certain Republicans might push away some of these white working class voters, but Ron DeSantis is so closely tied with President Trump that I wouldn't be surprised if he did. And while I don't think he is a President Trump, The Democratic Party also needs to acknowledge that the voters in Michigan of 2020 are not the same as the voters will be in 2024. And the voters in Michigan of 2012 are not the same as they were in 2016, with very two, completely different responses to the election choices. You had Obama winning in Michigan by nearly 10, then going to the Republicans in 2016, even with Obama being approved of in the state. So it's quite interesting to see how Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania really have changed. And I think that's largely because minorities are moving out of Philadelphia. They're moving out of Detroit. They're moving out of Milwaukee. And they're going down to the South. They're spreading across the Sun Belt region. And that region is getting bluer, but the Rust Belt is seemingly getting redder. And I think that Ron DeSantis might have just enough support to win Wisconsin, but narrowly lose Michigan, narrowly lose Pennsylvania, the way that they were narrowly lost by Donald Trump in the 2020 election. And, Ron DeSantis, I also think, would be a better shot for the GOP than Donald Trump on the entire level. And for North Carolina, this state I'm really stuck on. I really don't know how to characterize this state because one part of me is telling me that, it's going to vote with that traditional Republican vote. Even though Democrats have had times where they have been able to be successful, at the end of the day, it traditionally votes with the GOP. But Ron DeSantis isn't necessarily the traditional nor establishment GOP candidate. I mean, yes, he's a recognizable name, but he did run mainly on a Trump type of platform, and he continues to legislate with that, and somehow it's popular in the state of Florida. And while I wouldn't necessarily say that's beyond me, it's not something that I would expect in other states. I think that Florida is very particular in their interest and in their support of Ron DeSantis, and I don't know exactly how that would resonate, or I don't think it would resonate as well as it does in Florida across some other states. But I'm not going to say that Florida, the governor there, is going to lose the state of North Carolina. I think that's a state that Ron DeSantis will narrowly be able to win, but I don't think that it's a state where it's going to be a blowout victory, or the margin of victory for Donald Trump relative to him is going to be expanded or significantly or expanded at all. I think Ron DeSantis will narrowly win the state of North Carolina and possibly narrowly win the state of Wisconsin. I'm a little bit torn about the Rust Belt predictions because part of me wants to see all three vote together just because that's how it's been for the past couple of decades. But elections are pretty tricky, and some things do change over time, and the Rust Belt is a main portion. Census year after census year, they're decreasing in population, and the Republican vote share is getting better in certain counties, especially in the inner city counties where you're seeing minority voters move out of the state and into the South. And while that may be helping Democrats down there, it decreases their chances of victory across the Rust Belt and also the presidential shot at victory. It's not only on state and local levels, but it's also on the national level, as we now see. So my prediction as of today, May 29th, 2021, between Ron DeSantis and Joe Biden, I could honestly see a 293 map to 245. Do I think that Ron DeSantis is going to be that nominee? I don't know. I don't think so, but I really don't know. But in this scenario, based off of Joe Biden's popularity rating now, I think that he would perform, 293 at a minimum and potentially even better. But as of right now, I don't think Ron DeSantis has a pathway to victory against Joe Biden, but only time will tell. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.